In a world of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And now, your host, David Knight.
Well, it's October 23rd, 2017. I'm David Knight, and we've got a lot of news today. We're going to be talking to the wife of a man who came to the rescue of a child who was a victim of medical kidnapping. Her health was severely declining. He took action. He's been arrested and held without bail now for nearly 2 years. So we're going to talk to his wife today, and we're going to get some details about that, as well as a statement that he had that we recorded from prison. And we have that in a special report from John Bounds. Going to break that down. Then we're going to have an interview with her. And, of course, we're also going to be talking about an update that I think it's very important to take a look at with the Las Vegas shooting. There is a motion that's been filed to try to preserve evidence because, you know, it tends to disappear, doesn't it, after these events? Just like it did after 9/11. We had a lot of physical evidence that was destroyed, disappeared, hauled off, taken from the site, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So some individuals who are looking still at lawsuits, perhaps, against some of the casinos there, who knows, but nevertheless, they have filed a motion to preserve evidence in the October 1st shooting in Las Vegas. We're going to take a look at the money behind this. Some unusual trading activity, actually. And this is something that has been reported within the last, it's different people have talked about different aspects of this. I haven't talked about it. So I wanted to put together some interesting information that I saw, going back to some reports, because, you know, whenever there's insider trading, and insider trading doesn't necessarily mean that it is illegal. Whenever people who are executives in a company make major stock trades, it is monitored by the SEC. They have to file a report. And then at some point in the future, if somebody believes that there was the trading was staged based on pre-information, then that would be illegal insider trading. But just because executives are buying and selling stock doesn't mean that it is illegal. As a matter of fact, a lot of people use that as an investment strategy, looking to see what the corporate executives are doing. Both for an individual corporation and for the market in general. So people track all of that information. And we're going to take a look at what was going on about 3 weeks prior to the attack in Las Vegas. Now, before we get to the other news, I want to just hit some headline news. There's an update on a story that we had last week. Remember, we told you that there was an Obama-appointed judge. Her name was Tanya Chutkan. And she had a ruling that a young girl, a dreamer, who came here from somewhere in Central America, we don't know exactly where, they won't say, but she wanted to get a government-paid abortion. And the government said, no, we cannot do that. As a matter of fact, several state attorneys general joined in the motion to try to stop this from happening. Because you understand, besides the moral issues involved here, there's a massive financial issue. We cannot have uncontrolled expenditures put on us in terms of a welfare situation, not only for children's education. Any child who wants to come here from another country now can get an education for free in the language of their choice. And now they're trying to up the ante by saying that they can get an abortion here for free, paid for by taxpayers in America. And so a lot of state attorney generals joined in this. The judge, however, ordered on Wednesday to have the teenager transported to an abortion clinic promptly and without delay. The interesting thing is that federal officials refused to do that. And it was appealed. And now an appeals court at the end of the week halted that decision and said that they're going to take another look at this. And so that Obama judge's decisions demanding an abortion for that young girl has been put on hold for just a moment. When we come back, we have an update on some other border issues. The Somali terrorists behind the Canadian attack last couple of weeks, entered the U.S. from Mexico. And the Obama Department of Homeland Security let him do it. So he came in through Mexico, went up through the states, went into Canada, and attacked people with an ISIS flag in his car. Stay with us. I'm David Knight. We'll be right back. It's Monday, October 23rd, 2017. I'm David Knight, your host. I'm going to take a couple of articles, as I just mentioned in the last segment, very first segment at the top of the hour. We had an appeals court overrule the ruling by a judge that was appointed by Obama. Judge Tanya Chutkan had ordered on Wednesday for a dreamer teen who had come here The dreamer who, we're typically told that these kids come here, they're brought here by their parents. It's against their will, and we can't do anything about that. Now, here's a situation where you have a pregnant teen who came in here of her own volition, apparently, and she wants to abort the unborn child without its approval. And so what we had was the Obama judge ordering the teen to be taken for an abortion. It was delayed by federal officials, and then an appeals court the next day stopped it, put a stay on that order. Now, at the same time, we've got another example of the Obama open borders, the attack that happened in Canada. And, of course, it happened on September 30th, so it was overshadowed by the shooting that happened in Las Vegas. This was the Somali terrorist in Canada who hit the police officer with a car, slammed into the police officer, got out of the vehicle, repeatedly stabbed him, then got into the car again, drove for quite a while, and then ran several people down deliberately, ran down 4 pedestrians. And the Canadian authorities found an ISIS flag in his car. They have now found that he was an individual who entered the United States through the Mexican border. He was apprehended by Obama's Department of Homeland Security, and then they allowed him to go. And then this is the result. Now, the interesting thing about this, I think, is the reaction of Justin Trudeau, the liberal Canadian prime minister who is a close friend of Ivanka Trump. And he responded to this attack by sharing a call to end white supremacy and insisting that diversity is our strength. That is his response to completely open borders and a terrorist attack by a Somali with an ISIS flag in the back of his car. The problem, as we can obviously see from that event, is white supremacy and not enough diversity. Meanwhile, an example of someone with a concealed permit carry defending himself and others. This was a concealed permit holder in Detroit, Michigan. Return fire killed one of 2 armed suspects who ambushed him at a gas station. Police labeled the shooting an act of self-defense. He pulled in the gas station just after midnight. 2 masked suspects came out from behind the station and opened fire. He responded by shooting back. He killed one of the suspects. The other one fled and has not been apprehended. But it's interesting, too, that just like we've seen with Sheriff David Clark, the sheriff in Detroit has encouraged people to become responsible gun owners, to get concealed carry permits, to get training, and to defend themselves. Just as Sheriff Clark has said in the past, we will do what we can to help you, but we can't be there, obviously, all the time. We can't be there. You are the first line of defense for yourself, and people need to understand that. And that's what happened in that particular situation. Now, the other thing I think that is interesting in terms of being the first line of defense for yourself is what is happening with Bitcoin in Venezuela. And we know that in Venezuela, as well as in Zimbabwe, their economies have become basket cases. In Zimbabwe, they have had massive hyperinflation because of the Marxist government there. And the same thing is happening in Venezuela. And in both countries now, we have seen, as Zero Hedge puts it, something of a social experiment in the use of digital currency as a de facto currency because of the garbage currency that the government manages. They say that Bitcoin adoption in Zimbabwe is skyrocketing as the economic situation goes down. And, of course, the same thing is happening in Venezuela. They're at 2,400% inflation. 2,400% inflation. That means that things are going to cost 24 times next year what they do this year. That's how rapidly the currency is losing its value. And it was one of the richest per capita nations in the world. But this hyperinflation is the thing that is destroying these people. So what have some enterprising individuals done? They've started mining Bitcoin. Very interesting. They say while cryptocurrency, this is a Zero Hedge article, isn't explicitly illegal, the Venezuelans have tried to find a way to make it illegal because, of course, they are competing against the garbage currency that the government is printing. So now what they're doing is they're trying to ferret out who is using a lot of electricity and doing raids on these people to see if they are mining Bitcoin. That's how desperate they are in Venezuela. Maybe they could just fix the economy by stopping the controls that they have on it. So Bitcoin mining consultant Randy Brito estimates that about 100,000 Venezuelans are mining Bitcoin, although it's impossible to have an exact figure because many are protecting themselves by using the servers in foreign countries, protecting themselves from the Venezuelan police who are trying to monitor the use of electricity. They say transactions in Bitcoins amounted to $1.1 million in Venezuela in the last week of September, just in 1 week. And one local individual who spoke with AFP said that her mining rig is producing 20 to 25 Litecoins per month. They say each of those is worth $46, so that's $920 a month. And in a country where the basic salary, the minimum monthly salary is $40, and you can get a voucher of $56, that's $96 that the government that cares so much about you. The socialist government is there with a universal basic income of $96 a month because ultimately they don't have the money. And so this individual is able to make about 10 times that in a month by mining Bitcoin. So they're having to do this, however, clandestinely, just as people in some areas would, let's say, grow pot, and then they would look at massive electricity usage for the greenhouses and then jump down their throats on that. The same thing is happening in Venezuela. They say the government began cracking down on this. Police are extorting citizens, just like the drug war. Isn't this amazing? You know, when you have these are basically government failures. They try to prohibit this stuff. The government has created this problem by its garbage economy, and then when people try to respond to it, and they call it a black market, and then they start looking for electricity. They start blackmailing people for misusing electricity, say that they're undermining the country's economy. Well, if you want to look at who's undermining the country's economy, you probably want to start at the leadership of the government. That's the people who really destroyed Venezuela's economy. Meanwhile, as we look at this upcoming race between Judge Roy Moore and the Democrat challenger, Doug Jones, some interesting things are developing. There's been a war of words between Mitch McConnell and Steve Bannon. Mitch McConnell is saying Steve Bannon is an expert at picking failed candidates. This is coming from a guy who just picked Luther Strange and doubled down on it. The Republican establishment, this is a guy who, even though he is a sitting senator and even though he had massive ethical issues, they continued to stay behind Luther Strange, and they continued to pour into that race over $30 million. And the money was spent to attack the individual, Roy Moore, who had won the primary as a Republican. So what they're doing is eating their own. You got the Republicans who are saying, Mitch McConnell said, you know, the problem is we don't want to lose the general election. So what do? You take $30 million and you run it against the popular front runner to try to destroy his personality, even though you've got a guy who has massive ethical issues and is not with the people in terms of the issues. And then when he loses, you complain that other people don't know how to pick winners. One of the worst losers we have ever seen, and Mitch McConnell is now saying that. Now, what else is happening there? Well, we've had some polls that have come out from Fox News and others. And again, we talked about that last week, how radically skewed that poll, that widely circulated poll by Fox News, because people don't take polls for Senate races in states like they do for presidential races. They don't take them that frequently, and there's not that many organizations. So this is like the only poll we've got out there. And they're saying, oh, it's really close. It's within the margin of error. What they're doing is they're trying to energize Republicans who are never Trumpers to oppose the national agenda. And we know there's a lot of those out there, just like George W. Bush. And to try to get them to think that there's a way that they can win, to pour money into that race, as well as Democrats. But guess who else is pouring money into the race? Soros. He has been behind Doug Jones, a Democrat challenger, for quite some time. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight on this October 23rd, 2017. I was just talking about the upcoming election with Roy Moore and Doug Jones. Understand, there's an article on Breitbart today talking about how Doug Jones headed a Soros-funded project to transform federal prosecutors into social justice warriors. Now, there are also projects that are being put out there by George Soros to make sure that there are a lot of attorneys general and other people throughout the legal system. He wants activists who are elected to every possible prosecutor and attorney general position, because that's how they are going to win, folks. They cannot win at the ballot, but they can win through the lawsuit. And I think, when we look at the situation for a constitutional convention, and I don't support it. I interviewed a congressman who was making the case for it. And I think the fundamental problem with a constitutional convention is that nobody pays any attention to the laws. They don't obey the Constitution now. They swear an oath to it, but they pay absolutely no attention to the Constitution. So why would they pay attention to anything else? And they typically start with a balanced budget amendment. Well, you know, they can play all kinds of games by saying, well, this is off-budget money that we're spending now, right? And go back and take a look at what happened to the contract with America that Newt Gingrich put through. He had, I think it was like 10 different things that he had promised that they would do, and they basically did all of them except for one of them. And that was term limits. So, of course, that's one of the things they want to say. They want to say Congress will never pass term limits on themselves. Well, that's true. They won't. But they'll find a way around it one way or the other, even if you put that in. But they didn't do that. But what they did do is they gave the president a line item veto. And guess what happened at that point? You had Rudy Giuliani in New York take it to the court system and challenge that, and you had the court say, sorry, that's not constitutional. It's not constitutional. So I don't think with a constitutional convention that you're really going to get very far. And I'm very dismayed about the fact that nobody's really talking about any kind of judicial reform. Nobody on the right. I mean, it's serving the left. And this project with George Soros is another example of it. Doug Jones, the candidate who is opposing Roy Moore in December's special election to replace Jeff Sessions in Alabama, Judge Doug Jones, working with George Soros, spearheaded an effort on behalf of a legal group that was massively funded by George Soros, the Moriarty of Marxism, of globalism, I should say, that sought to fundamentally transform the role of U.S. attorneys from one of prosecuting criminals to activists that enact a so-called progressive criminal justice agenda. And they're not just social justice warriors. That, I believe, is part of their effort to build their voter database, getting involved in this kind of activism. But they're going to work very hard to get these activist, progressive, if you will, prosecutors and attorneys general. That's a big part of George Soros's operations. Remember that as soon as Barack Obama was finished, President Trump was elected, and as part of the transition team, he already started accumulating lawyers around him. People like Eric Holder say, we're going to go through and we're going to set up lawsuits in all these states to overturn the gerrymandering that has been going on since this republic was created. Because now the state legislatures, after Obama has been in office, they've lost about 1,000 offices during that period of time. And as I've said before, North Carolina in 2008, they voted for Obama. But 2 years later, it was a massive reversal of that after they had seen the policies. It wasn't involved with racism. People in North Carolina, deep South state, voted for Barack Obama. But 2 years later, they saw his policies and they started heavily swinging Republican, more so than any other time. And during Obama's administration, we saw 1,000 positions, elected positions lost by the Democrat Party. So how do they respond? They respond with lawsuits to try to tie up the political process, to try to get in the courts what they could not win at the ballot box. And so that is ultimately what is behind this. And that should be a big warning flag for everyone about this election in Alabama. The other warning flag is that we have the establishment Republicans as well as the Democrat Party that are going to be pouring millions, tens of millions into this race. You just watch. I mean, look at the amount of money that they have poured into race after race after race. Some of these congressional races, absolutely amazing. Now, this is a Senate race. And this is a Senate race with someone that the left and the establishment Republicans really hate. And you wait and see. After the establishment Republicans put over $30 million in it to tar and feather Roy Moore, wait till you see how much money they spend on this coming election. Now, I want to get into what is happening and the danger of Facebook and social media becoming the arbiters of fake news and becoming an adjunct of law enforcement and intelligence. I got a couple of cases here that are absolutely amazing, and I want to get to them in just a moment. Before I do, real quickly, I'll remind you of some of the sales that are going to be ending very soon at InfoWarsStore.com. BrainForce Plus, still 50% off, but take advantage of this. This is not going to last much longer. It's the deepest discount we've ever had on BrainForce. A great product. I use it all the time. Also, Super Male Vitality, 30% off, and Anthroplex, 50% off. And then the 3 Big, important, these are things that we started at the very beginning. Iodine, selenium, Secret 12, vitamin B12, 40% off all three of those. Our Survival Shield X2, nascent iodine, that's from a deep earth source, 40% off on that pure iodine. Also, BioTrue Selenium, 100% organic, made from mustard seeds, and there's no synthetics, no fillers in that. We call it BioTrue. It's selenium. You know that you need selenium in your diet. That is 40% off. And Secret 12, our vitamin B12 formula, that is also 40% off. And finally, we have 20% off Infowars Wake Up America coffee. Just enter the code WAKEUP. See, we've made it easy for you. Wake Up America. You enter the code WAKEUP at checkout. You get 20% off Infowars Wake Up America. And you can choose it in either Patriot Blend or Immune Support Blend. Now, when we talk about the Orwellian consequences of social media being used as an adjunct of the government, take a look at this. This is coming from Haaretz in Israel. Israel arrests a Palestinian because Facebook translated good morning to attack them. Israeli police mistakenly arrested a Palestinian worker last week because they relied on an automatic translation software from Facebook to translate a post that he put on his Facebook page. And the post was simply a picture. So he puts a picture of himself working at a construction site on the West Bank near Jerusalem. In the picture, he's leaning against a bulldozer alongside the caption, "Good morning," and he wrote that in Arabic. Now, Facebook offers an automatic translation service, and they have their own proprietary algorithms. And this wonderful proprietary algorithm translated "good morning" in Arabic to attack them in Hebrew and to hurt them in English. And so he was promptly arrested until they got that squared out. Now, combine that with the fact that Facebook has told us that they have the ability to discern fake news. We're saying this over and over again. CNBC reported on October the 5th that Facebook would immediately start allowing a user to tap a button and be told whether or not the news is fake. So they're going to discern it immediately. Okay, and then as we pointed out before, they're talking about threatening you. If you decide that you're still going to share that with somebody, or you're still going to retweet that, something that they have through their magical, mystical algorithms that never make mistakes. They have discerned that it is fake news. Then they'll put up something that will threaten you and say, remember, if you share this and it's false, you might get a civil lawsuit. So we're going to talk about that when we come back, because that example in Israel is not the only one. I've got more. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and of course, we don't claim to have any ability to discern right away what fake news is and isn't. But of course, Facebook does. They say they can tell what fake news is. Meanwhile, they've got algorithms. And we're going to talk about some automated algorithms and the dangers involved in them a little bit later in the program. But they had an algorithm that translated a caption on a picture of a guy working at a construction site in the West Bank, Palestinian. And he had said there, "Good morning." And they translated it in Hebrew to attack them and in English to hurt them. And of course, the guy was arrested. And that's not the only example of this. Here's an example that comes from RT, a guy who says, you don't expect this in a democracy. He was wrongly put on a terrorist list by Reuters. Yes, not even the TSA, not even Homeland Security. And that was one of the first cases that I had when I came here to Infowars, was an individual who was put on a no-fly list. He had been vetted by the TSA. He was an airport worker. He had been vetted for weapons carry by the FBI. He'd been vetted by multiple government agencies. He was going to visit his wife, who was stationed in Japan, and he was actually flying on a Defense Department plane. And when they got to Hawaii, which was a stopover, he got off, they changed planes, he's on the plane, and just before it took off, they came in and dragged him off the plane, and he was stuck there. They said, you're on a no-fly list. Well, if you're on a no-fly list and you're in Hawaii, it's kind of tough to go anywhere. And he couldn't get any answers from anybody. That was the key thing. That's what he was trying to get answers for. It's like, why am I on this list? Can't tell you that. I mean, this is like straight out of Kafka. Oh, we can't tell you why you're a suspect. We can't tell you anything about that. As a matter of fact, we can't even tell you if we've taken you off the list. Eventually, he got some advocates in the Defense Department on his side, and he was able to fly back to the United States. But he could never get an answer from them as to why he was put on the list or if he was, in fact, ever taken off of the list. And now here's the situation. This is in the UK. This is a British Palestinian academic and an activist. And he's talking about the ordeal he endured while his name was featured on the World Check database that is owned by Thomson Reuters. And it's used by banks to blacklist customers. So they not only have a no-fly list, which they can put people and have put people on, they put children on the no-fly list as suspected terrorists. So you can't find out if you're on the list. You can't find out if they've ever taken you off the list or whatever. But there's other lists that are out there. Meanwhile, you have the government, the Democrats who want to use this no-fly list, which is totally bogus. They want to use that as a means to further restrict people's Second Amendment rights without due process, of course, and without the ability to confront your accusers or to see the evidence against you or to even know that you are on a super secret list, a new Kafka list. But the same thing is done by banks. So there's this private version of the no-fly list, but I guess you could call it the no bank list, no financial transactions list. Last February, Vice magazine revealed that a number of decorated civil rights activists and prominent religious leaders and politicians were included on the long list of individuals and organizations drawn up from often questionable and highly partisan open sources, reports RT. As a result, their accounts were disabled by the banks that they were clients of. And of course, they did the same thing to WikiLeaks. But that was a little bit more overt. Everybody knew that that was happening at the time they did it to WikiLeaks. And this individual says, until that moment, till he saw the report from Vice magazine, he had no idea why his accounts had been closed down at 3 different banks. And he goes, when I found out about this and where this is coming from, he says, this isn't even the United Nations. This is not a government and living in a democracy like Britain. You don't expect something like this to happen. So his point is that this wasn't the national government in Britain. It wasn't the United Nations. He didn't know where this came from. It was a private organization. Thomson Reuters creates a list and they give it to banks and they shut you down. They shut down your bank accounts. He said initially, he said, no, your name is not on the list. So you just like the no-fly list. Then I send them another message saying, are you sure my name is not on the list? And I think here they felt that if they did not tell the truth at that time, they might be liable to prosecution. So they admitted that they had a profile on me as early as 2003. So that went on for 14 years. He was on a secret banking list until things started getting hot for them and until there was a report by media showing that, yes, they have this super secret list of people that they're going to set out. Now, here's another example. In Germany. So we've looked at Israel. We've looked at the UK. And now let's take a look at Germany. And what do all of these have in common? Well, you have private entities, private corporations. And a lot of them are working in conjunction with the government, or they're working in pressure from the government, trying to toady up to the government because the government is threatening them with action. If Google, Facebook, and Twitter don't toe the line, they're threatened with action by our Western governments, just like they're threatened with action by the Chinese government. A lot of people have gotten angry with Apple and others who have taken down apps that would get around the Great Firewall of China, for example. And so they kowtow to the Chinese communists. And they also kowtow to Western governments, the UK, the US, Germany, others. And what does it look like? Well, in Germany, Zero Hedge reports full censorship is now official. A new German law introducing state censorship on social media platforms came into effect October the 1st. The new law requires social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc., to censor their users on behalf of the German state. Social media companies are obliged to delete or block any online criminal offenses such as libel, slander, defamation, or incitement within 24 hours of receipt of a user complaint. Now, that's the key thing here, folks. All it is a complaint. Somebody doesn't like you, doesn't like your news organization. They don't like your politics, so they just complain. It doesn't have to be something that is inaccurate. It doesn't have to be fake. Facebook says we can discern fake stuff, and yet they're putting stuff out there that, as I pointed out in Israel, got a guy arrested because of their algorithmic mistranslation. And so as we see these private corporations in both a crony capitalist relationship, toadying up to the government, but also, they get the carrot and the stick, getting threats from the government. And they're using them then as instruments of censorship, as instruments of law enforcement. And it is so convenient for them to use these corporations that way. Because if the governments were to come in and to enact the censorship directly, then people would take them to court. They would say, wait a minute, in the U.S., we've got a First Amendment. You can't do that. But if they pressure or cajole Facebook, Twitter, YouTube to censor you, if they do it under duress or they do it out of cooperation, trying to do a favor for the government, hoping that the government will then give them a pass on other things, well, then the government says, we can't do anything about that. These are private sites. They can make their own rules. This is a tactic that has been used to shut down third-party debates for a very long time, but now they're going to shut down political debate with everybody across social media using this same tactic, saying the censorship is not coming from the government, it's coming from this third-party organization. Because in states where you would have debates, the debates are typically done by a third-party organization. They would have the Association of mainstream media, and I forget what they would call it back in North Carolina. Mainstream media groups would get together and they would sponsor the debate. And so when you would complain that you've been excluded, they would say, well, you met all the ballot qualifications. As a matter of fact, you did more to get on the ballot than the Republicans or Democrats did, but we're not going to include you in the debate because the debate is a private entity and we have no say-so over what private entities do. And so now they're going to use that same tactic to shut down political debate by you, talking to your friends over Facebook, over Twitter. They're going to shut that down just as they did in Germany. So then 24 hours of somebody complaining about it, regardless of whether or not the content is accurate, they will have to shut this down. And as they point out on this article from the Gatestone Institute, they say this state censorship makes free speech subject to the arbitrary decisions of corporate entities that are likely to censor more than absolutely necessary rather than risk a crushing fine. And so when they use these individuals to do it, they are going to be extremely cautious, and you will have no repercussion against these private entities that create a massive web of censorship and surveillance. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, we need to get you out there, all of you out there in the public saying, show me the money. We're going to take a look at what's going on in Vegas because this is one aspect that we really haven't talked about that much. Some people have talked a little bit about it. I saw some chatter on some small websites about it, and somebody sent me a message and said, hey, there was 80% of the stock was sold by the CEO of MGM just a few weeks before this event happened. I thought, is that right? That's kind of unusual, isn't it? And so I looked it up, and it's like, yeah, it was actually more than that. It was like 90% he sold 3 weeks before the shooting. And that is very, very suspicious, especially as we look at the things like the Ellen and Jesus show that was put on. I won't even dignify that to call it an interview. If that didn't make you suspicious after the disappearance for several days, after the multiple timelines, if that final interview done by Ellen DeGeneres of Jesus Campos, if that didn't make you suspicious, nothing will. Okay? Nothing will make you suspicious. And as I've said time and time again, they like to call us conspiracy theorists. But what we do is when we look at a story, we begin with questions and we start to rule out what is impossible. They begin with a conclusion that is impossible, and then they start to rule out questions. That's why they call you conspiracy theorists, or they call you tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist if you start to ask questions about their impossible scenarios. And it's interesting that we've had now a motion filed to preserve evidence in the shooting in Las Vegas. Mandalay Bay and its corporate owner, MGM Resorts, has been ordered not to destroy anything that could be considered evidence in a civil negligence trial over events related to that Route 91 shooting. The order was brought by attorneys that represented a California woman who survived the attack despite being shot in the chest 3 times. And the attorney said, the shooter was in that hotel for 6 days. There's evidence that's coming out about surveillance cameras that he may have set up himself, evidence about ways that he may have altered his room or that hallway. Yeah, evidence has been destroyed by the FBI. Maybe we should get them to stop taking stuff off of people's phones as they look at eyewitnesses. But of course, we know that there is going to be a lot of evidence that is in that casino. They've got cameras all over the place. And so now a judge has put a restraining order restraining MGM Mandalay Bay from destroying anything of any evidentiary value until another hearing that is set for October the 30th. That's when they'll have a chance to argue against the ruling, or they will make the order permanent. And so this is a very important issue because you understand the massive legal liability that MGM could have. And that was something that really came to the forefront after they reversed the timeline. Initially, they had Jesus Campos being the hero who stopped the shooting. He came in and stopped the shooting, and he got shot as a result of that. Then they reversed the timeline after many, many days. What was it, 8 or 9 days, if I'm remembering correctly, but I'm going by memory. They reversed the timeline and then had him on the scene at the very beginning, even before the shooting began, and being the first person who was shot. They still continue to call him a hero, even though that narrative would not have him be a hero. But the second version of the timeline created some liability for MGM, simply from the fact that they said that it was 6 minutes before the police were called. And so after that came out, Jesus, who had scheduled to be on 5 shows, one of them including the Sean Hannity show to be interviewed, disappeared, abruptly disappeared, just ran off as he had all these interviews lined up that night. And within a day or two, we had the sheriff come out, tearfully change the timeline and say, no, we were called 40 seconds after he was shot. So that was version 3 of the timeline. So we've had this go back and forth. And of course, what that is all about, and when he resurfaced after 5 or 6 days on the Ellen show, somebody who has a lot of ties, as we showed, with MGM. She had done a lot of specials with the casinos. They'd even created a slot machine for Ellen. She had prominently featured that on her show, a slot machine in the MGM Grand. And so they got Ellen to come on and do this dog and pony show, and then pronounce at the end of it, no more interviews. That's it. He's done. He wants to go back to his life. But of course, she didn't ask him any questions that even a junior journalist would ask. It was a total whitewash of what was going on. So the question is, was there trading going on? Insider trading. And we saw that happen prior to 9/11. We saw massive trades that happened with United Airlines and with American Airlines. We had executives that were selling off a lot of their stock before 9/11. Those were the 2 airlines that were involved. Of course, nobody ever went back and investigated that, as far as I know. And maybe nobody will ever go back and investigate what happened with MGM, but it is suspicious nevertheless. And again, remember that insider trading doesn't necessarily mean that it's illegal. You can sell your stocks for whatever reason, but whenever you are a corporate officer and you sell stock, you have to file an SEC report. So there is a record out there about all the executives at MGM who sold stock. And I saw that article and I thought, is this true? So I went back and looked and I found AmericanBankingNews.com. And what they talked about was back on September the 8th, the CEO of MGM Resorts International sold 294,000 shares of his stock. I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. And so I took a look at that, and it turns out that he had sold a lot of shares the day before, on the 7th as well. He had sold 259,000 shares. And then he'd had some transactions on July and August. Now, those two, on July 31st and August 9th, he sold exactly the same number of shares, which is kind of strange, because usually you would think that somebody would sell an even number of shares. In both of those cases, he sold 57,269 shares for whatever reason. But that only amounted, those two combined, 1 week apart, July 31st to August the 9th, a week apart, those only combined were about 15% of his shares. But then when you look at what he sold on September the 7th and the 8th, he sold 89% of his shares. 89% of his shares 3 weeks before this happened. And this was done in an environment where you had hedge funds like Canyon Capital adding 19%. They had a position in MGM. And of course, they talk in this report, it's American Banking News. They say that most of the stock of MGM Resorts is owned by large institutional investors. And so Canyon Capital added 19%, Stifel Financial added 39%, GMT Capital added 89%, Highbridge Capital added 92.4%. And when you look at what the research analysts are saying, you had only one research analyst out of 21 rated it a sell. 2 gave it a hold, and 18 said buy more of it. And so in this environment, where all these institutional investors, where all these research analysts are very bullish on this stock, saying buy, he's selling off 90% of his stock. Now, maybe he needed to have the money, but it's a pattern that we see with other executives of MGM Resorts as well. I think that's suspicious. Maybe the SEC doesn't. They didn't think it was suspicious when United Airlines and American Airlines sold their stock before September 11th. We're going to take some of your phone calls, and I want to talk to you about this particular thing, about the Vegas shooting, just in general, if you want. We're going to limit it to the Vegas shooting. We're going to limit it to the Mueller special prosecution and to the comments by Congresswoman Frederica Wilson on the Gold Star controversy. So if you want to call, that number is 888-201-2244. We're going to have you as our guest in the next hour, 888-201-2244. And before we go to break, I just want to remind you of some of the sales that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. We still have 50% off of BrainForce Plus, but not for long. We're going to have to remove that pretty soon because we need to reserve things for people who are on auto ship. And of course, if you've never done auto ship, you can sign up for any of the products that you want, and you can get 10% off of them. You sign up for what products you want, the interval that you want them, and you will always get 10% off of the products. And if your order totals more than $50 in your periodic order on auto ship, then you will get free shipping for those as well. We also have 40% off our BioTrue Selenium, our Nascent Iodine, and our Secret 12, our vitamin B12 formula. And we have 20% off Wake Up America Coffee. Just enter the code WAKEUP at checkout, and you can get 20% off of Wake Up America Coffee. That's in either a Patriot blend or an Immune Support blend. All right, so when we come back, we're going to take some of your calls. We're also going to do some news at the top of the hour. And we've also got a clip that we want to play for you. There's several clips that have come out from Frederica Wilson, the congresswoman that you've never heard of. Now, the lady who wears a cowboy hat everywhere she goes, and she's got a gazillion of these cowboy hat uniforms. And she now thinks that being called an empty barrel is racist. And we're going to show you when we come back exactly why she is an empty barrel and why it is not racist. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight.